Hey, everybody, welcome to Resiliency Radio, your go-to podcast for the most cutting-edge insights in integrative and functional medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Jill, and with each episode, we dive into the heart of healing and personal transformation. Join us as I interview renowned medical thought leaders, world experts, and interesting individuals of all types and backgrounds to optimize your performance for better living and longevity. Today, I have a guest, Dr. Vincent Pedre, who's an old friend, has been a former guest on our podcast, and we're going to dive deep into gut immune interface, gut-brain connection, and even microplastics. So stay tuned for this fascinating and helpful interview with Dr. Pedre. If you haven't yet subscribed, click the subscribe button. It helps us to reach more people, and you can join the more than 570,000 individuals who have already subscribed to our channel. If you're on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you watch or listen to podcasts, please stop by and leave us a review and share this episode if you find it helpful with your friends and family. Also want to mention, if you have not yet seen the movie Dr. Patient, it's available now on Amazon Prime, on YouTube and Tubi with commercials for free. And you can find that all at drpatientmovie.com. And finally, if you have comments or questions on any of my episodes, I actually jump in the comment section. I answer your questions there. So please leave a thought, a comment, or if this episode has impacted you, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Okay, let me introduce our guest. Dr. Vincent Pedre is the medical director of Pedre Integrative Health and founder of Dr. Pedre Wellness, also founder of Happy Gut Life, and worked as a nutraceutical consultant and spokesperson for Nature MD and orthomolecular products. He's a functional medicine certified practitioner and has a concierge practice in New York City since 2004. As a best-selling author of two books on the gut, he believes the gut is a gateway to excellent wellness. His latest book, Gut Smart Protocol, features a 14-day personalized gut healing plan based on Gut Smart quiz and is accumulation of years of research and clinical experience. And now we're going to talk also about his new offering, Happy Gut Coffee. But let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Peter Pedre to our show. Dr. Pedre, it's so good to have you back on the show, and it's always fun to see you out and about in conferences. We were just talking about travel, and there's so many fun things to do, and that's usually where I see you in Vegas at A4M or one of those things. I love that you have really made your work about the gut because so much of our functional realm is the gut. And today we're talking about toxic ties, microplastics, the gut. Microplastics has got a lot of press lately, and I'm really anxious to hear from your perspective, how does it tie to the gut, the brain, all these things. But before we do, for those of you who haven't heard the first podcast that we did, tell us a little bit about your story and your journey to becoming this functional medicine gut expert.
Oh God. Let me see if I can like abridge that because I always feel like your story also, it's such a journey,
Yeah.
right? But my story was like 20 plus years of suffering from gut issues after having been on 20 plus rounds of antibiotics as a child, going from a chubby kid to a super thin kid through my growth spurt, then not being able to gain any weight and struggling, being made fun of, having all sorts of body dysmorphia as a child, um, trying to eat so much. I calculate that I was eating between 3 and 4,000 calories a day, and yet I was like
Yeah.
this. Imagine 5 feet 11 and 120 pounds,
Oh,
115 pounds. And I worked out, I did everything, but it was because of all the antibiotics decimated my gut microbiome. My gut was leaky, and I was eating two of the biggest food groups that were in my diet that I had become sensitive to, wheat and dairy.
yes. The big two.
And so I honestly, by the time I arrived in medical school, I was just kind of resigned to the fact that my gut had a mind of its own, and sometimes it was good and sometimes it wasn't good. And since we didn't get any diet training in med school, I had no real concept of why things happen. It just seemed very haphazard and random. Sometimes when I ate out, didn't feel good, running to the bathroom, and Honestly, by the time I was in residency training, probably residency is the worst thing that could ever happen to your gut.
Isn't it? We're trained to like not use a restroom, not eat, not sleep. Like it's the worst training in the world,
You're
right?
basically made to deny anything that's happening in your body, you have to deny to be in service of
Yes.
others. And then there's the middle of the night calls at 2, 3 in the morning, and you're exhausted. And sometimes the only thing that would get me through the night, honestly, were peanut M&Ms.
Yeah, I remember those days too. And because you're so tired. And there's studies that show we eat really poorly and make poor decisions when we're so exhausted. So it's like the
Yeah.
perfect setup for, and I remember eating all kinds of stuff I would never eat because I was so tired.
Any Anybody that is sleep, we know that sleep deprivation increases carb cravings, sugar cravings. So you get into this little roller coaster where you're like going into this sugar high, crashing, making it through the day. So my gut was a mess. I just remember like that walk home after a 27 hours at the hospital where I was hungry but nauseous at the same time. And I knew I needed to eat, but I also knew that the minute I ate, if I ate as much as my hunger was calling for,
Mhm.
that would actually feel sick to my stomach afterwards.
Wow.
And I just thought that I had, by then I was having eczema in my hands and lots of fatigue, brain fog that I really just attributed to the long hours. But honestly, by the time I finished my training, and I was still of a philosophy like I don't want to take antacid medications. I don't want to take an antidepressant for IBS, and that was the era that I finished my training in when they're like, well, if things don't work, then you put them on an antidepressant, you put them on an SSRI. And I knew I didn't want to be on those medications, so I just kind of suffered silently until I discovered functional medicine and realized that what I thought was my life sentence was actually reversible. And it's just that I didn't have the right knowledge and I hadn't been taught the right protocols to do that. And once I started learning about the microbiome and all that, I used myself as a guinea pig.
Yeah.
And I started following all the advice, just believing not. And at first, you're kind of like, really, is this going to work? Like,
Yeah.
really, I just need to have some fermented foods and have probiotics. But then soon after, like, I'm sort of a data person.
Mhm.
When working with patients, I think you and I understand that the data is only gets you so far.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of gray zones, but I still needed some data. So, because if I was going to give up gluten,
Hmm.
I needed to see on a blood test that gluten was bad for me.
Yeah.
Now, to understand, like, by then I'm in my 30s and my mom has rheumatoid arthritis, and I'm starting to learn about the gut immune connection and leaky gut and how disease evolves in the body. And I'm starting to think I have leaky gut.
Hmm.
I've got IBS. I have now potentially wheat sensitivity, all that. I could be on track to developing an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And I wanted to stop that. I
Mhm.
wanted to like think, okay, I'm in my 30s. I'm still young enough that I could reverse these things. And so I did a blood test. I think it was like an IgG4 and complement activation test, and gluten lit up.
Yeah.
I wasn't celiac, but at that point, I was like, I can't deny what's on the paper.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go gluten free. And this was 2007 when it was easy, but also not so easy.
Right.
And still, there were a lot of restaurants in New York that weren't very gluten aware. So sometimes it was hard to eat out because you didn't know if you were still getting glutenized through cross contamination and stuff. But we became a gluten-free household.
Uh-huh.
And what was most dramatic for me, I think that's probably the most dramatic change, is from not eating sandwiches at lunch and just going through the process of having to actually go into my brain and reprogram how you eat because our eating choices become like these reflex habits. So like lunchtime comes and I was thinking, okay, maybe I'll go get a pizza, maybe I'll go get a sandwich. And now I had to rethink like, okay, I can't go there.
Yeah.
No, I can't go there either. So now where am I going to go? Like if I'm eating out or am I going to bring food to work? So I had to redefine. I found that that was probably the most challenging part, but also not so challenging once I figured out the new set of options that I could have, which actually, in many ways, like it forced me to eat healthier than I had ever eaten before.
Yeah, you really have to think.
Because you're cutting out all the processed grains.
Mhm.
And within 2 weeks, now leading up to this, I remember having a sandwich for lunch, and at 3 or 4 p.m., like someone might as well have given me an Ambien because my eyes were so heavy,
Mhm.
and I'm in clinic seeing patients, and all I want is to go lie down and take a nap.
Yeah.
And so part of my motivation, not just fixing the gut, but was like, how can I fix my energy? How can I fix my alertness so that I can do a 12-hour day with patients and still be as fresh at the end of the day as I was at the beginning of the day. And within 2 weeks of giving up gluten, it was like a light bulb went off, and I had so much energy now that I was not having any bread products at lunchtime. And then I knew like, oh wow, like this is
There is
something.
something here, right?
I did not realize how damaging gluten was. I still thought like, okay, I'm doing an elimination diet. I'll bring gluten back in at some point. So I went to 3 months, tested gluten, had a new symptom that I had never had before. Within 15 minutes of eating some rye bread, I think at brunch, I started noticing like a little bit of redness on the inside of my wrist, and I got itchy.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, okay, that's strange. New symptom. I had never had this symptom before, but I'm paying attention. Maybe it's related. I'm gonna go gluten-free for another 3 months.
Yeah.
Retest at 6 months. Same thing happens.
Wow. Uh-huh.
The inner wrist gets itchy
Uh-huh.
within like 10 to 15 minutes after having. And at that point, I'm making, now we're looking at like symptom correlation. I'm like, okay, now this has happened twice. It's happened in the same setting.
Yeah.
This is not a coincidence. This is no longer an elimination diet. This is a lifestyle.
Mhm.
And from that point forward, I stayed gluten-free. And I will say until very recently, where I started experimenting with peptide therapy and taking BPC 157 and some other gut peptides. And actually, the other part of the story is my dairy sensitivity and how dairy actually weakens my immune system, and I would get sick.
Uh-huh.
So I love dairy and I love cheese.
Uh-huh.
And I figured out after a couple of years of experimentation that I could eat cheese during the summer month window, and then I cut it out for the rest of the year. No dairy, very strict.
Uh-huh.
And that way I would get less sick, not pick up as many viruses. This winter with BPC 157, I had dairy whenever I wanted to,
Uh-huh.
did not get sick.
Amazing.
Did not get, there were days, interestingly, where I did notice, like if I was going a little bit too much, I was getting some histamine
Mhm.
effect, but it was so surprising because even then, if I was getting a little bit of histamine with dairy, it would become a lot.
Yes.
And I would get nasal congestion and sneezing and all that. And the longer I stayed on the peptide, the less I got. And so by the time my son was studying in Italy abroad in Rome this year, and so I went to visit him at the end of March. And by the end of March, I had been on BPC 157 for 5 months.
Mhm.
And I just decided, you know what, like one, less pesticides, maybe wheat is a little bit different. I know there's people argue back and forth on that, but I think honestly, I think our food is different here in
Yes,
the
in
United
Europe,
States.
it's totally different. Uh-huh.
So I just decided, you know what? I've been on BPC 157 for 5 months. I'm going to stress test my system
Mhm.
and I'm going to have gluten while I'm in Italy. I'm going to have wheat. I'm not going to restrict.
Yeah.
Um, and I was fine.
Wow.
Now, I did also I also like to use SBIs, serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins. So while I was in Italy, if I was having something, I was having my SBIs every
Yeah.
day as kind of
Hmm.
gut protection. But where this is again where I can connect to a previous point in time. So if I go back about 11 years was the last time I went to Italy. And on that trip, I also did not restrict.
Hmm.
And when I came back from Italy, my gut was a mess for like
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Yeah. I see a lot of patients do that and they don't feel terrible because it is a different kind of gluten. I think there's less
Yeah,
gliadin in the gluten in Europe. There's no glyphosate. There's lots of reasons, but often
exactly.
they do have this immune flare that thyroid antibodies will go up. So how cool. I love peptides. I use them all the time in clinical practice. Have you used
Yeah.
larazotide, the new anti-zonulin peptide? Because I feel like that's a big
Yeah.
feature too. So how cool. Now, a couple of things I want to mention that you said in your story that are so relevant to patients. First of all, I think the data is important. And in the early days, you just like for me with patients, we're looking at like these anti-gliadin antibodies. I just had two men, different stories, one in the 40s, one in the 50s, and they both came back with really high anti-gliadin antibodies. They had different issues. One had depression, anxiety, the other had weight gain. And
Mm.
both of them went off gluten and were shocked at how much not just the gut symptoms improved, but the mental, the sleep, the focus. And I loved what you mentioned about that afternoon thing, because what many people don't realize is that gluten can be connected to our mental state, our sleep,
Yeah.
depression, anxiety. In fact, I think about 50% react in the brain and the other 50% react in the gut. And I'll let you talk a little about that. But there's this thing called gluteomorphine, right?
Yeah,
It has a
exactly.
morphine-like effect that, so for some people, I experienced that as well. And I had the non-celiac gluten sensitivity before I found out I truly had celiac later. But all that to say that sometimes gluten in certain people will act like a drug. And so we crave it more,
Exactly.
we want it more, we love it. In
Yeah.
fact, one of these men I'm
It has
yeah.
addictive
Yes.
properties, like
Mhm.
more I remember from the days that I used to eat bread when you went to the dinner table and they served the bread while you're waiting for dinner, you have one, but then you can't just stop at
Right.
one. Then you have two, then you have three.
And it's
Then
so
before you know it,
good.
all the bread is gone and you're
Uh-huh.
asking for another bread
Yeah.
basket.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like going to what is the Italian place called? It's like a chain where they give you unlimited bread. Like you can
Yeah.
just keep asking
Olive
for
Garden or one
bread.
of those kind of basic like yeah, yeah,
Olive Garden, where they
yeah.
give you unlimited bread.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But so that
Uh,
so yeah, I've used these and I'm now using these peptides in my practice to shortcut
yeah.
the time to improvement
Hmm.
for patients. And the interesting thing for me was the contrast between 11 years ago
Yeah.
when I was gluten-free and I had done a lot of gut rebuilding, and yet I came back from Italy and my gut was a mess
Yeah.
for a bit. I also thought it was the stress of coming back to the United States,
Yeah. Right.
being away.
Uh-huh.
But this time I came back and my gut was not a mess.
Yeah.
It was a completely different experience. The only thing I would say is that I still, after eating pasta in Italy, I still got that food coma.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like the carb kind of food coming. So
Yeah,
one thing I want to talk about, this is so relevant because part of our title is gut-brain connection, and we're talking about some of these things dancing around. Do you want to
yeah.
dive into gut-brain connection? What are you seeing in your clients, your patients, and how might people out there listening not realize that leaky gut, bacterial overgrowth, or some of these things that go on in the gut, or even IBS, can connect to depression,
There's
anxiety,
so
insomnia?
many things, so many interconnections, and there's actually different pathways and ways to look at it.
Mhm.
Even just starting with the stomach and acid production, if your stomach acid production is low, or if you're someone out there who's taking a PPI because you get acid reflux and your gastroenterologist told you that it's too much stomach acid, so let's put you on a PPI. But now you find that you can't digest protein as well, and you're not eating. But then it can lead to depression, can lead to mood disorders because now you're not getting all the important amino acids that you need, the precursors for creating serotonin like L-tryptophan.
Hmm.
So just starting at the upper stomach and the effects that that has, and then leaky gut and its effect on increasing the translocation of endotoxin and inflammatory substances that normally the brain would be protected from because of the blood-brain barrier and its protected circulation. But when you have leaky gut, eventually you get leaky blood-brain barrier. And now
Hmm.
your brain is susceptible to the same inflammatory substances that get through the gut. And I think a lot of people don't realize that depression and a lot of mood disorders, even if you have bipolar,
Hmm.
is not singularly a brain issue.
Correct.
And no, for people more extreme like bipolar disorder, you may not be able to go completely off of your medications. But I have seen even bipolar patients, when you address the gut,
Yeah.
that they are actually able to reduce their medications and their peaks and troughs, the mania and depression actually become much more dampened. They're not as high and as low. So even in people where they might still need some
Yeah.
medical intervention, working on the gut always improves brain health.
Hmm. Oh, I couldn't
It's
agree more. And I think more and more, I'm thinking depression, anxiety are almost all organic in nature. They're not, I mean, yes, we have genetic predispositions, we have SNPs, we have all these things that contribute, but in my experience, almost 100% depression, anxiety, bipolar, or any of those spectrum, even insomnia, gut work can improve. Um,
yes.
Most of the time, pretty dramatically.
I like this study that I looked at when I was writing my last book, and it was a study where they looked at treatment-resistant depression, where people had failed 1 to 2 medications, and what they did is they looked at vagal nerve stimulation. So they used a vagal nerve stimulation device, and they found that people were treatment-resistant. That 37% of them they were able to reverse their depression using vagal nerve stimulation.
Mm, wow, that's impressive. And that's better than antidepressants as far as the statistics, right?
It's better, yeah, it's better than antidepressant. And for anyone listening, like the reason I'm bringing that up is because the vagus nerve and the brain, it's how the gut communicates back to the brain. It's the longest nerve in the body, and it has more fibers pointing back up to the brain, like 70, 80% of the fibers, than down from the brain to the gut. Although they're important in both directions.
Mhm.
I think it's super important. And we learned that from patients with traumatic brain injury, that when you get a traumatic brain injury, within 30 to 60 minutes of the brain injury, you actually get an increase in gut permeability, and then you get a lot of inflammation coming into the body that then
Yeah.
affects the brain. And I
Mm.
wish I had known that when I was younger, because at 19, I was in a bike accident where I actually lost consciousness, hit my head, what I believe is the ground. I still don't have memory
Uh-huh.
of a few seconds before it happened until I woke up in the hospital like 30 minutes later. And I'm sure that that also contributed to my gut health issues.
Yeah, we even see in the ICU. I mean, obviously, like the conventional docs prescribe PPIs for everyone in the ICU because they know, even though you and I know that's not the best solution, their idea is that, oh, we're going to have this, overload to systemic toxicity through the gut barrier because it's going to be impaired post-surgery or ICU.
Right.
Speaking of leaky gut, what's your top pearls for those listening that they might want to try some things? Where would you start with either supplements or things to help people heal this intestinal permeability issue?
Look, I've used the classics like L-glutamine for years. And of course, like leaky gut formulas that have DGL and aloe and marshmallow root bark and slippery elm. But honestly, I haven't seen things work as fast as the peptides,
Mhm. Yeah.
like the BPC 157, the lorazepam, the
Hmm.
KPV.
Yeah.
Although I'm also a really big fan of using SBIs.
Yes.
I think they they really help give that gut lining a break by binding
Yeah.
toxins, endotoxin, lipopolysaccharide, or even like CDT, like cytolethal descending toxins, which I surprisingly have been finding patients with that this year. Um, but you have to be careful with the SBIs, right? Especially in women who tend towards
Yeah.
constipation, they can push you over the edge. So you're always kind of like teetering.
Hmm.
But right now, I'm working with a patient who was diagnosed with was ulcerative colitis, and she's been treated with Stelara, but then had a breakthrough even on the Stelara. And she came to see me when she was in the middle of a flare. And just going with the research, there was a study done using SBIs, 5 grams twice a day.
Hmm.
And they found that within the first week, this was for people with ulcerative colitis who were having a flare that were not responsive to traditional therapies. And just using these bovine immunoglobulins, it was like 43 or 47% of them responded within 1 week.
Wow. Yeah.
And then by 12 weeks, 75% of them responded using 5 grams twice a day of these SBIs. And these were non-responders to traditional therapies. This patient I recently saw and put her on the SBIs along with some other strategies. And by the second week on the SBIs, her poops were normal and no more blood in the stool.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, just a quick moment to remind you that you can get all of these great gut health products at drjillhealth.com. We have our own brand of SBI, which is bovine immune globulins. It's called Gut Immune caps or powder. It's a great way to help improve that mucosal barrier and support your immune system. One of our top selling products. And as we just mentioned, there's also Spore Probiotic with IG. That is a probiotic that is spore-based with immunoglobulins included. So it's kind of a nice one size fits all if you want something very simple. Our Spore Probiotic with IG is a great resource. You can find these all and other gut support supplements specially curated for you with the most highest quality ingredients at drjillhealth.com. Okay, back to our show. No, that's my experience too, is some of the peptides, the bovine immune globulins are so powerful that glutamine kind of pales in comparison. It's great, but it's like what we used to use 10 years ago. There's so much better options out there.
There's
So
so many
yeah.
better options.
Mhm.
I am actually waiting for someone to come out with this, and I don't know, maybe you know someone that has done this, but I think it would be great to have a delayed release butyrate
Yes.
supplement that gets all the way down to the large intestine and then releases in the large intestine. I think that would be super excellent because what all we have is like butyrate enemas or taking oral butyrate, but a lot of it is not going to get all the way down to the large intestine.
Especially in the distal colitis, like your patient's scenario, we often need that really. I've used butyrate enemas too for those people who have distal symptoms, but even then, it's inconvenient. It's hard to. I love that idea. And if I had to pick my top three, you just said them: the peptides, the bovine immune globulins, and butyric acid. Is those are
Yeah.
powerhouses, aren't they?
Postbiotics.
Yeah.
I also like to use spore-based
Mhm.
probiotics a lot.
Me too.
I've actually kind of leaned a lot in that direction. Although with people with ulcerative colitis, I will still
Use some.
use a lot of the traditional,
Mhm.
the lactobacilli and the
Yeah.
bifidobacteria. But
Do you
I
do the
like the
commercial, like the Visbiome or VSL or any of the commercial ones? Yeah.
VSL number 3.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of spore-based probiotics, I've been testing out a lot of different ones. And actually, I don't know what your experience is with them, because I know Microbiome Labs was a really big one, Megaspore Biotic.
Mhm.
Uh, but I actually see a slightly better response. And this is only this is not a study. This is
Uh-huh.
just my observation with my own patients, very small cohort of people. But I really love the Orthospore Complete.
Yes, yes, I completely agree. And even the single spores like Bacillus subtilis or Bacillus coagulans, My
Yeah.
most sensitive patients, I just do one. And it's funny because my history, I had the Crohn's 20 plus years ago. And that was when there was one company that made bacillus coagulans. None of us knew even what it was because no one knew about spores. There was no
Right.
hardly research, or maybe what research was there wasn't in our repertoire. And I remember being like, no other probiotic helped me as much as that simple spore. And that was before I knew what it was. And now I'm like, oh, no wonder it was a spore. So I'm a little partial to spores because of my experience.
I think they also, they do a lot of things. They have something called quorum sensing,
Mm.
which is basically like they go in and they reclaim the real estate from the bad bugs,
Yes.
and they can get together and they produce these antimicrobial peptides, and they just basically reclaim the territory. But they also support the growth of other good bugs, and I
Yeah.
think they can support butyrate producers.
Mhm.
So I think of, like butyrate supplementation can be either direct or it can be indirect by supporting your own little butyrate factories inside your
And many
gut.
people don't know when you increase short chain fatty acid, you increase production naturally of GLP-1, which is obviously the most huge blockbuster weight loss drug out there right now. So I love to help people incorporate things that will increase their short chain fatty acids naturally so that they're naturally making more of that kind of appetite satiety, mechanism. So one thing,
Polyphenols,
yes, yes,
things like
yes.
that.
Microplastics. I don't want to forget this topic because this is to me one of
Yes.
the big things that is such a big conundrum because we know toxic mold and all this other stuff we've dealt with, and we have binders and that. But I think microplastics is kind of a unique, very, very serious threat because we don't
Mhm.
really have great binders for plastics. How are you seeing microplastics in your health of your patients, in the gut health, and what do you say about this problem? Because I think it's a big
This
deal.
is This is what, when I was starting to research, like, what are because we already know, like, microplastics are endocrine disrupting chemicals. They come in and they act like estrogen in the body. But do they do anything else? And I decided, like, I want to look into the gut effects of microplastics. And I had seen a study on patients with inflammatory bowel disease, and they looked at patients with inflammatory bowel disease and people who don't have, and they did fecal testing for microplastics, and they found that the people with IBD had, I think it was about double or more the level of microplastics than people who did not have inflammatory bowel disease.
Mm.
So then there's not a lot of human studies, so I started looking at like the animal studies out there, and there was a study done on mice, and they found that microplastics caused liver enzyme
Love it.
increases. They messed up lipids, and they led to weight gain. But then there was another study done on zebrafish where they looked at the microbiome and the lining of the intestines. They found that the microplastics disrupted the mucus layer, and then they also cause dysbiosis and overgrowth of certain bad bugs. For anybody listening, like you have to imagine that the intestinal lining is just this single cell layer, like super thin lining. And if you can imagine on the inside of that lining, there's a tiny, tiny mucus layer. It's like nanometers thick. And there's an inner and there's an outer mucus layer. The inner layer is, in ideal circumstances, it is completely free of bacteria. And then the outer layer, that's where the bacteria, the good bacteria live, and they're talking back and forth with our immune system. They're helping to regulate things like there's another polysaccharide A, which is secreted by bacteria that actually activates dendritic cells and also directly T cells to become T regulatory cells, which are tolerant. So they help to quiet down your immune response. But so these microplastics are coming in and they're breaking up that mucus layer. Once you lose the mucus layer, it's imagine like you were like a 14th century castle with a moat. And the moat is protecting the castle, but something comes in and actually removes the water from the moat. So now people can start breaking into the wall of the castle. And that's what these microplastics are doing and disrupting the gut microbiome. And humans are not animals, but when you see like there's this like just the correlative study, obviously it's not a double-blind placebo-controlled study, but seeing that people with IBD had higher levels of microplastics in their stool, you have to start thinking from from the animal studies. If we're seeing that it disrupts the mucus layer, causes leaky gut, causes dysbiosis, that it must be doing something like that in humans as well.
Wow. That's exactly what we're seeing is we're seeing, I'd love to know your thoughts, but younger and younger people with IBD, Crohn's and colitis. I see a ton of those kinds of patients in my practice. And it seems
Yeah.
to me more severe compared to 10 or 20 years ago when I give a little glutamine and maybe a few of the probiotics that we had. I could really help people improve or go into remission. Whereas now I feel like it is a lot more complex and more serious. And a lot of them are coming in already on immune
We
modulation.
are in an onslaught. I heard a statistic that in the last 8 years, the amount of microplastics in the human brain has increased by like 18%. I don't know if people who are listening realize like not only are these microplastics disruptive to the gut, they're getting into our bodies and they're getting accumulated inside our organs.
Our brains, our arteries, right? They've been found in plaques. They've been found like a credit card worth in our brains. And so what do we do about it? What strat? Because I feel like this is not that we can't figure this out, but this is a tough one because it's not really.
It is a tough one, and I've been thinking about like and I don't know, I haven't done this test. I actually have the test upstairs in my
Yeah.
apartment. It's called plastic tox, and it's a finger prick
Uh-huh.
that checks for microplastics in your blood. But I was thinking like, if microplastics also get accumulated, like you said, in the arteries,
Yeah.
in the brain and organs,
Yeah.
like are you really gonna see what's in the body? But I'm gonna do the test and see what it shows. But traditional detoxification like infrared sauna, I think is very important.
Yeah.
And then I was at a conference and I met up with the actually there she was the granddaughter of the founder of Body Bio.
Oh, yeah.
And she was showing me a study that they had done with the Body Bio PC, the
Mhm.
phospholipids,
Yeah.
and that it actually removed microplastics.
Wow. I think that's what's going to happen is more I've talked to a lot of the different people in our sphere that are doing research or doing having companies and same thing. I'm like, what are we doing about this? And I think what's going to happen is just like you and I talking, there's going to be more people talking and whether they're doing the research or the small trials or even like you and I, it's clinical interventions and then watching. One thought I
And
had, which is I am all on this train, and if you watch this podcast, stay tuned because there'll be more, but plasmapheresis, I feel like that might be a really big thing. I am all in to help get that in
I
my
love that
clinic
idea.
soon because it's like an oil change for your plasma and it really reduces toxic load so dramatically. And I feel like we're going to need something that dramatic for the future of toxic load.
Yeah, and for all the people who are inflamed, like chronically inflamed, where their bodies just can't shut off that TH1, THC
Yeah.
17 balance. Um, but yeah, I think we really, I started scratching my head. I'm like, okay, now we have this problem, but how do we deal with it?
Right?
How do you remove accumulated microplastics, and what role are they also having in dementia and
Hmm.
Alzheimer's
Yeah.
as well? But I think just like mold,
Hmm.
the number one thing is to reduce exposure.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So to really start thinking about, I talk about the micro habits,
Uh-huh.
the little things that we do every day that we don't really give a lot of importance to, but if you add them up over the course of a year, are actually affecting your health at macro levels.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest micro habits that I think have been normalized in this country, and when you go to countries like Italy, you realize that this is not
Yeah.
normal, is the to-go cup with your coffee.
Yes. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I'm like in my car, I always have a thermos or something that I'm going to, and if I don't have it or forget it, I tell myself I can't get coffee. Like I do my best to really do.
See, because people don't realize, like, probably one of the biggest exposures to microplastics is those to-go cups. The minute that hot liquid hits the inside of that cup, which is lined with plastic,
Mhm.
it starts to release
Yeah.
little pieces of plastic into
Yeah.
the hot coffee, and then you're drinking that, you're
Mhm.
ingesting. And when I was in Rome, the one thing that I noticed is that there are no to-go cups.
Yeah. You drink a
When
real
you go, when
ceramic
you have
mug,
a
right?
coffee, you have a cappuccino, you drink it in a ceramic cup and you sit there at the cafe and you don't leave until you're done. There's no concept of like, yeah, I'm just going to take this to go with me.
Well, and think about that for our nervous system. That's a whole nother level, right? Of like, just be present. Like, what if we actually weren't in the society where, like, boom, we have to drive through and get our coffee? What if we actually
That
sat?
is
Yeah.
our mentality. And I live in New York, which
Yeah.
is probably one of the fastest paced cities in the country. And what I noticed is that my nervous system wound down in Rome,
Yeah.
where I would just go to a cafe and have my cappuccino in the morning and yeah, like not rush. And also not have that rush mentality because
Yeah.
there is no to go, so you just have to stay.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, this is worth a pause because think about the gut-brain connection, our stress hormones. And I think anyone who's ever been to Europe and really almost any other country other than the US, there is a whole different way of living that we are not experiencing. And I don't know that we can, like you said, New York and even where I'm at in Colorado, it's hard to go against the grain when that's the norm. But let's talk real quickly. What would you say with your experience in Europe and this being a really big deal with our guts and the vagus nerve, right? What are some
Yeah.
practical tips people could do to kind of enact that vagus nerve for more healing and more of a slower presence or pace?
I mean, it starts with all the things we know now that have become at least somewhat mainstream, meditation, mindfulness, breath work. I am a big fan, and I found that I'm a big fan of making things easy,
Yeah.
first of all, because if it's not easy, patient's gonna walk out the door and not gonna do it. Um, and and certainly in functional medicine, like when we were training in functional medicine, like we learn all these fancy protocols and like you do all this and all the different parts, the social, the exercise, the movement, structure, but then you give that to a patient and they're overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're so overwhelmed. So one thing that I do and I teach my patients is I call it the humming breath.
Uh-huh.
And it's combining deep diaphragmatic inhalations
Hmm.
with a hummed exhale.
Yeah.
And it does a couple of things without even having to force the person to do it. Because when you're humming as you exhale, your mouth is closed during the exhale and you're going, hmm. You have that vibration here with your vocal cords. The vibration is helping to activate the vagus nerve. But you're also doing a 2-to-1 breath where the exhalation now is twice as long as the inhalation, which also
Yes.
calms the nervous system. And I tell my patients just set a timer for 5 minutes
Yeah.
and inhale and hum on the exhale until that timer goes off. And the great thing was this patient I had in Germany, and she has a lot of trauma with her mom.
Yeah.
And and so she would get very worked up when she had to go see her mom. And after I taught her this, she told me, I was on my way to see my mom. I realized that I was getting, wound up. And so I actually stopped the car and just did the humming breath for 5 minutes. It completely shifted me. And then I went and saw my mom.
I love that. And that's such a practical, simple way, even for those listening. I hope they will take that and practice it because one of the things I think is so important for us as clinicians is to create safety for the patient, which is all about how do we hold that vagus nerve, and also just very practical, simple, not expensive ways for them to be empowered. And that's one of those really, really
Yeah,
powerful
like
ways,
I mean there's all these vagus nerve stimulation devices
right?
and lately like I do still have those patients
Hmm.
who are either so overwhelmed
Yeah,
they're or they just think that it's kind of silly
yeah,
to hum or they don't believe that it's science-based, so they're kind of resistant to doing it. So in those patients, I will recommend something like the Alpha Stim, which is a vagus
yeah.
nerve
Hmm.
stimulation device and I'll show them like this is FDA approved
Right.
for anxiety, and I can actually write you a prescription for it.
Hmm.
And then I use that as a way to get them to sit and breathe because that you have to use for like 15, 20 minutes at a time, if not longer, depending on
Hmm.
the frequency. And but at least it's an avenue
Yeah.
to get there because I think there's many paths
Yeah.
to stimulating the vagus nerve. Another one that people don't think about, and I wrote about in my book, is because the vagus nerve has all these serotonin receptor endings on all along the gut. And guess who's producing serotonin? Your gut microbiome.
Yes. Yes.
And we actually produce more serotonin in the gut than in the brain. But I hate when like people talk about this and then I see this on social media all the time. They're implying that this gut serotonin is affecting the brain directly, but it actually, serotonin can't cross the blood-brain barrier.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for the brain to make something like melatonin, it actually has to make melatonin from serotonin that's been made in the brain.
Hmm.
It can't import the serotonin from outside the body. But the serotonin in the gut is serving a very important purpose. And one of those is to bind to those 5-HT receptors that are at the end of the vagus nerve and send an impulse back to the brain.
Yeah. It's a,
And a lot of the neurons on the other side are actually GABAergic neurons that are releasing GABA at the nerve endings of the vagus in the brain, which is then quieting down brain waves. So that for me is one thing that we don't think about is eating fermented foods supporting the gut microbiome is actually also supporting your vagus nerve.
yeah. It's such a like the gut brain is way bigger than people think, and you and I have dove in, and I think the research continues to come out. Um, Love this information, so practical. Thank you for all the work that you've done. One thing I want to make sure and talk about is speaking of happy gut, you've got a new
Yes.
product, and I'm so excited. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite, right? And I always joke when I do a lecture, chocolate and coffee, and I talk about the increase in short chain fatty acids and how powerful those are as modulators with the polyphenols. So I'm a huge fan. Do you want to talk about your product and what you have to
I'll
share?
mention it. So
Yeah.
we've come out with a Happy Gut coffee in
Awesome.
the last year. This is kind of like a love project for me in a sense.
Uh-huh.
I grew up Cuban, so coffee culture was
Oh, yeah.
very big in my upbringing. And I also was born in the 70s. So we actually rebranded Happy Gut inspired by the coffee. And if you look at the
Wow.
sunrise
Uh-huh.
image, it's got sort of kind of a little bit of a retro 70s
Love it.
flair. So it's kind of my
Yeah.
little tipping my hat to my parents. God bless them in
Yeah.
heaven. And the thing is that people might not realize, but a lot of coffee out there, and there's actually a study that looked at there were 13 of 25 samples of green coffee beans were contaminated with okra toxin.
Yes, this is my big thing.
And
It's like mold and coffee, right? Yeah.
mold in
Mm.
coffee, okra toxin A. And actually, the US has no regulations on how much okra toxin can be allowed in coffee, whereas in Europe,
Hmm.
they do not allow any more than 5 micrograms per kilogram. So we have no
Yeah.
regulations around that. So I wanted to not just create a coffee that was delicious, but also organically sourced from
Yeah.
small farms, free of mold, free of mycotoxins, free of pesticides, no glyphosate. And honestly, I think it tastes great.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited because I really think, and the beautiful thing is, I think coffee gets a bad rap, but if we look at the number one source of polyphenols for most Americans, it is coffee, which means, and we know the liver studies, I could go on and on, but I'm a big
It
fan.
is it is the probably the most consumed beverage worldwide. I read a statistic that 2 billion cups of coffee are served every single day,
Wow.
and 150 million American adults drink coffee every day. So for me, it was like, okay, for years I've been doing detoxes, cleanses, and telling people not to drink coffee, and the first thing they're asking me is, when can I have my coffee back? So I thought, okay, the micro habits that people do every day, like let me meet them
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
with a product that's
Things
good
that,
for them,
mhm.
and then use that for me as an entry point to teach about microplastics, about other habits.
Yeah.
We didn't even go into K cups
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
ways that people are getting exposed to microplastics that don't realize like all the modern
Yeah.
conveniences are overexposing us to
Yeah.
plastics. Even
Tea
the coffee
bags, K
makers.
cups, current. I mean, yeah, we could go on and on
Yeah,
about.
even the coffee maker, like the water is running
Yeah.
through plastic tubing. So the way I make my coffee in the morning, which is actually to me like talking about a moment of pause and mindfulness,
Yeah.
is grinding the beans using a pour over with a filter, with an organic filter, and I just slowly pour the hot water and and people think like, okay, the Nespresso or the K cups, like it probably takes just as long to do a pour over. It just
Yeah.
maybe takes a little bit more work.
Hmm.
But I'm doing other things as I'm
Yeah.
pouring over, I'm getting dressed, I'm coming back, I'm putting some more, and then it becomes part of my mindfulness morning routine.
Yeah. Yeah. The ritual. Well, this is so good. And I love ending on the topic of coffee. And I love that you've created a product that's not only clean, free of mycotoxins, but beneficial to the gut. Where can people find more about your coffee, about you, and about everything that you've been doing?
They can go to happygutcoffee.com and learn more about the coffee. We have a caffeinated version that we call Smooth, and we also have a decaf version that we call Serenity.
Mm.
And I'm always posting, just like you, on Instagram at Dr. Pedre. I believe in uh, providing as much free flow of information and wisdom as I can share, because I think everybody should be have access to this information. And of course, if you want to spend a couple of dollars, there's a lot of wisdom in my book about how to heal the gut, made into a very simple way for anybody to understand the science behind leaky gut, behind the gut-brain connection, behind all of these things.
It's a great book. I highly recommend you guys go out and check it out to get all the info. And I remember specifically because I think our releases were almost the same month or week or
They
something. It
were
was
so
really
close
close.
together.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming on the show, Dr. Pedre.
Thanks for having me back. Always a great conversation with you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Resiliency Radio. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Pedre about the gut, and we'll check out his Gut Smart book. It's a great resource. If you haven't yet subscribed, click the button below if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify or iTunes or anywhere else you're listening to podcasts, please stop by, leave us a review. It helps us to reach more people and attract amazing guests for you each week. Also, if you want to get all the transcripts, the downloads, or find any other information about older podcasts, you can find that all at my main website, jillcarnahan.com. All right, have a great day, and I will see you next week for a new episode of Resiliency Radio.